Yes, we're talking about Maimonides, the Rabbi. We spoke about him, his life, and Maimonides as a philosopher. Now we're going to speak to him, Maimonides, his role as a rabbi. Now, the two are not separate. You know what I'm saying? It's not his philosophy is very much focused on Judaism, of course, but his rabbinical activity has a lot of philosophy in it. We already saw it somewhat in last class when we spoke about the Book of the Lamp, i.e., his commentary on the Mishnah, and where his commentary on the Mishnah had quite a decent portion of philosophy and very influential how do you say, exposition of the hereafter, for instance. That was very philosophically inspired. But okay, so it's all too much to do it all in one class, so we divide it between the two. Let's look at his most influential work on Jewish law. That's going to be our focus, and this work on Jewish law is the Mishneh Torah. Now, the Mishneh Torah is a summary of Jewish law. It is rather unique. For the longest period of time, people didn't summarize Jewish law. They wrote commentaries on the Talmud and on topics. But summarizing the whole entire Jewish law, has been done after him. But as far as my knowledge, not before him. And if anyone tried to do it, well, then not as systematically, for sure. So it was written in Hebrew, which is very important. That helped the spread of it, because at that point, when he wrote this, he already saw that the Ashkenazi world, the non-Arabic world, was becoming more important. And Maimonides had interactions with people who lived in the Christian world, was very much aware that there's a considerable Jewish community now, and especially after people had to leave Spain because of the Almohads. It's like that was the end of this era. So there were a lot of people who had gone to Christian lands, and within a generation or two, some families kept Arabic in the family, but first of all, these families soon enough would not speak Arabic fluently anymore. And secondly, these families who had gone to Christian lands also had discovered and become more aware of these flourishing other communities that never had spoken Arabic in the first place. So he wrote Mishneh Torah in Hebrew for that purpose, knowing that there was a need for works in Hebrew and not just Arabic anymore. So as I wrote here, after Maimonides, it's interesting. I just thought about it last night when I was preparing this. So Maimonides has been under the Almoravids, right, until he was 13. Then 13 is not very old, so it's not that he went to these prestigious schools and stuff. Then the Almohads came, and of course, Judaism went underground. So there was no open Jewish community anymore, so no Jewish schools. So everybody had to be taught just in the home, right? So from his 13th year and then 20 years living under the Almohads, his education had just been in private by his father, most likely, or maybe somebody who come, but a lot of on his own. So until he's 33, and then when he's 33 to go to Egypt, then he gets a job, and he has a full-time job, and he's already a rabbi. So that means in 20 years, and a bit before, but these 20 years is just more studying on his own. So it's amazing, without a official, like homeschooling basically, without an official school system of Jewish school system, Maimonides became so knowledgeable that at the point that, as I wrote here, after studying all the discussion in the Talmud, so the Talmud is a very complicated, huge book of a lot of discussions, but naming every possible argument back and forth, not necessarily saying who won the discussion. There's all these thoughts, and at the end, you just move to another discussion. But he studied all these discussions, not only did he study all these discussions, which in itself is amazing, but also understanding discussion and coming to a clear position of which of these points of view in the Talmud are the ones that should generate Jewish law and which are not. So he had gone through all these discussions, and he wrote down in the Mishnah Torah the actual outcome of these discussions. Now, that's an amazing achievement, because it's not always so clear. So what are the rulings? He wrote down not just on top, on proportion, but also on topic. So let's say you want to have the laws of Shabbat. Now there is a tractate in the Talmud, rather big tractate called Tractate or Masechet Shabbat. But it doesn't mean they're in the Tractate of Shabbat. It's not only on Shabbat, it's about a lot of other things too, because other discussions come in. And there are laws of Shabbat all over the place in other parts too. So you have to really know exactly where all the laws are. He took all the laws from all the different places and put them by topic, systemized. Amazing, amazing job for somebody without official, having gone to a yeshiva or hardly or anything. So by topic, he did not put source reference. He didn't say I have it from this place or from this page or from this page. That caused it was always done because he wanted to make it. Who cares where it's from? This is the law, and just look by law. It would be too big and also not as practical. If you have the sources and the discussions everywhere, you're not going to have a handy book of what the laws are. And this is the most shocking and will be the most shocking thing, because in two classes from now, next week, we're going to have, we're going to talk about the culture clash of the two worlds, pro Maimonides against Maimonides, people being upset at what he writes, people supporting what he writes. This is what he writes. He says, all anyone needs from now on, now I wrote this book, is the Torah and this book. So you don't need the Talmud anymore. The Talmud is not the goal of Judaism in the eye of Arabic Jews and Andalusian Jews of his time. The Talmud is a phase in the discussion, is looking for what really the outcome of what we call the oral law should be. And now we came to the conclusions of the outcome. Now this is it, and only if you're a specialist, you want to look at the sources, where it comes from, you could look at the Talmud now and then, but this is not necessary for everybody. You just have the Torah, because that's our holy book, and you have my book, so no need for the Talmud anymore. If you see what a culture shock that is already, if you paid attention to Rashi and the class of the Tosafists, the Tosafists studying the intricate discussions of the Talmud was almost the goal, the height of Judaism. This is, if you really want to flourish in Judaism, want to be a super Jew, you will know all these discussions. And that is almost a vessel. Like, no, not a vessel, a portal for the Holy Spirit to connect to. No, from my mom, this is not at all. He says it's the opposite. So, total different culture. I'm continuing. And I'm going to ask, is Anaya here? I've missed her so many times. Rachel is here. Yeah, Rachel, you're ready and able. Very good. Do you want to start reading?
Sure. Before me, there were Gaonim and great men who composed tracts in Hebrew or Arabic to determine the rulings in specific matters. But establishing the rulings of the entire Talmud and all the laws of Torah, no one has done this before me since the day of our holy Rabbi, Judah the Prince, and his holy command.
Yeah, this is, of course, Maimonides writing about it. He's justifiably proud, right? Yeah. He also writes to his student, Yosef ibn Sjimon.
I urge you not to neglect the study of this book until you apprehend all of it. Make it your own book, teach it everywhere, and make its usefulness known. Because the intended purpose of the Talmud was lost and vanished, the purpose of the erudite today is to waste time in Talmudic discussions as if Its only intention was to exercise polemical skills.
Yeah.
That, however, was not its primary intention. Discussions and polemics occurred only accidentally. Therefore, I was moved to return to the initial purpose.
Yeah, I finally, Menachem, get to answer one of your questions that was standing for so long. Your question was, why do you call a certain period in Spain, in the Iberian Insula, the Golden Age? Isn't the Golden Age the time of the Talmud, when the Talmud was written? Right, that was your question. And I thought I'll hold it because this is going to come up eventually very much. Because my response would be, this is very much an Ashkenazi question, because you have grown up seeing and perceiving that studying the Talmud is the highest. Talmud is the highest, the zenith of Judaism, and so that is what they call Ashkenormative, basically. It is so the old Sephardi, the old Arabic Jews, so to say, didn't perceive that at all like that, as you see here. He's actually saying the purpose of the erudite today is to waste time in Talmudic discussions. This would be heresy in nowadays in Ashkenazi world, and nowadays I think so somewhat many Sephardi communities too, because they have adopted for a large extent that attitude. But the old thing was Jewish law, the right, believing the right things, which was not as important in Ashkenazi. But we'll see also in 2 weeks that when he says you're not allowed to even imagine God in a body or describe him as a body, because that is not monotheism, and then you're not really a monotheist. You're like a heretic, an idol worshiper. And if you ascribe body parts to God, and the reaction was from Ashkenazi sources, who does this guy think he is? We have some of our great rabbis believe that he has a body. Not that we agree, but they believed it. So, and they're bigger than him. So, what another world, a different world. But studying the Torah, and just focusing on the discussions, wasting of time is quite. I can't portray a starker difference in culture. Okay, in his introduction to the book of precepts, he says, Rachel,
I saw fit to prepare a composition that includes all the laws and commandments of the Torah, and to avoid mentioning disagreements and positions that were rejected, and to list only final rulings. I also choose to omit the justifications and arguments in support of each ruling, the names of the transmitters.
Yeah, we will. Well, in a way, it's nice that the Talmud, of course, has also the opinions of those who are rejected, because there is something to learn from it. But if you just focus on Jewish law, then it's okay. So this was a stage we were thinking of this opinion, but it was rejected. This turns out not to be the Jewish law, and so systemizing this whole Jewish law, halacha, as it's called in Hebrew, halacha is Jewish law. To systemize it and to make it straight and to make it chewable and palpable and understandable and systemized is very much as we saw last week, very similar in thought process. Of course, it's a different religion to the attitude of the Almohads, who also systemized. Before them, the Almoravids was supporting Malachite. It's a Malachite Islam. It's one of the 4 schools of Sunni Islam. Sunni Islam has a rule here and an exception here, but if this, and very much like Talmudic law, but the Almohads systemize it. It's like not all these. There's basic principles and so very philosophically founded, straightforward principles, much simplified, almost a bit as Muslims call it, Salafi a bit, although it's not exactly the same. So Maimonides does the same in Judaism, even though, Rachel?
Even though its work is a Jewish law, the Mishnah Torah still shows philosophical influence. Philosophical notions are embedding in Jewish law. For instance, according to Maimonides, According to Maimonides, believing in one incorporeal God is a commandment. Therefore, to believe in divine anthropomorphism is heresy and idolatry. Also, God is reason. Therefore, anything that is irrational goes against God
and against his will. Yeah, so the belief in one and therefore incorporeality is a commandment. We saw that with the Almohads. That was very much similar also. Good. Well, this is very interesting. I think I had another thought, but I lost it. Okay. Yeah. Philosophical notions are embedded in Jewish law. Not only that, the whole point of systemizing things this way comes from his philosophy. Yeah. Let's go to, who's next? Let's go to, is Cassandra here?
Hi, I'm here.
Oh, yes, Cassandra. Very nice. So I will do the first line because it's Hebrew. Laws of the foundation of the Torah. So the foundation is the principles, right? So of course that invites him to write philosophy. He starts with the Hebrew, which is cute. Yesod, Hayesodot, Amod, HaChochma. You see it's a symbolic. It's almost, this is a bit like poetry almost, even though he's against poetry, but here the first words of the Mishneh Torah the first word starts with the letter Yud, and then I have the letters big, and then Hey, Vav, Hey, the four letters of the name of God. It's just, okay. But what does he really say here?
The foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdom is to know that there is a primary being who brought into being all that exists.
These words do not sound like a traditional idea of God, like there's a God who's a loving God who made you, this is a primary being. This primary being is the foundation of all foundation, the pillar of wisdom. It sounds like an abstract principle, right? Doesn't sound like a personal God. And so here is par excellence the philosopher. So he's now talking about, like a underlying principle as God, and that's his first sentence. And he continues.
He alone is true, and no other entity possesses truth compared to his truth. That is what the Torah means when it says there is nothing else aside from him. Aside from him, there is no true existence. This entity is the God of the universe and the Lord of the entire world.
If you think about these words, it's amazing that all truth is in his truth. Now, there's many things that are true. For instance, that we're not seeing each other face to face, but we're on Zoom. That is true. Why is it true? It's part of the whole universe. This is how the universe is right now at this moment. But he says there is no truth outside of his truth. That means that all the things that are true are basically part of God. God is bigger than just our idea of a person. All that is true is God. Also, this ties into his philosophy that if you turn away from truth and if you turn away from anything real, then by let's say we spoke about that he's against getting drunk because you're blurring your reason, your sense of reason, and you're not seeing truth clearly. That's turning away from God. So from him, God is much more than how we define God. God is like a powerful principle. But there's nothing else aside from him, meaning everything that truly exists, that is not exists because of God and is part of God in a way. Now, this is a totally different idea of the traditional God, right? Is the God of the universe. So he is everything in the universe, everywhere in the universe is this underlying principle, i.e. God, that is the Lord of the entire world, which means it rules the universe. The question is this a God that can you relate to on a personal level? So I believe so, but we'll see. Let's go here. So there's so many things, and we could talk so much about. We could have a whole course about his philosophy, absolutely easily, but we're not going to do that. We have to cramp everything just into a few points. So maybe you want to read this. This God is one.
Were the were the Creator to have a body or a form, he would have limitations, because it is impossible for a body to be unlimited. Since he is not a body, the circumstances associated with bodies that produce division and separation are not applicable to him. Therefore, it is impossible for him to be anything other than one.
We saw part of this argument already with Sadiqa that if God had a body, he would be limited. He also have parts because that's what a body is by definition. So this cannot be God. This cannot be one. This cannot be, um, so it has to be if he's one, he cannot have a body. Okay, so that's not so hard to. I think that's not so hard to understand. Yes.
Behold, it is explicitly stated in the Torah and in the prophets that the Holy One, blessed be he, has no body or physical form, as it is written. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below, and a body cannot exist in two places.
Yeah, if he's in two places, then that's not a body. Uh, okay. Now, so if God doesn't have a body, and by the way, I very briefly, because of limit of time, talked about his purely philosophical book, The Guide of the Perplexed. Unfortunately, didn't get much into it. That could be a whole different class easily too. But he explains there why is if there is no God doesn't have a body, and if he isn't in a location, why does it say God came down to look at the building of the when people build a tower of Babel? When he says the earth will be below his feet, when it says it's written, the Ten Commandments were written by the finger of God, when it speaks about God's hands, God's eyes, God's ears, all these things, why does the Torah use these expressions and what does it mean? Yes?
All these expressions are to relate of a human level of understanding which knows only corporeal reality. Therefore, the Torah speaks in the language of humans. They are only descriptive terms such as, I will whet my lightning sword. Does he have a sword? Does he need a sword? Rather, this is a metaphoric image.
So the key language here, I whet my lightning sword. Okay, that I put that highlight that, but maybe I should have highlighted the other sentence. The Torah speaks in the language of humans. That's a key sentence. The Torah speaks in a way that's relevant for the people who first received it, basically. What's meaningful for them. So if there is a concept that humans, at least the people who received the Torah in the first generation, if there's a concept that the people cannot comprehend, and the Torah will instill the some parts of that concept in words that they can comprehend. So that means that and human language is limited, and humans' capability and their capability to comprehend. The comprehension is limited. So therefore, the language of the Torah is limited. But we have to look beyond the language of the Torah to the deeper meanings. Yeah.
Since it has been clarified that he does not have a body or physical form, it is also clear that none of the functions of a body apply to him. Neither connection nor separation, neither place nor measure, neither standing nor sitting. He is not within time, so that he would have a beginning, an end, or age. He does not change.
We saw this similar reasoning with the kalam. So you're all familiar with it. So, but once again, it is quite shocking for people who are attached to a traditional idea of God as a person with feelings. And it's not always easy to relate to something that is so different from us that if it's something is so totally different from us humans, we cannot, it's hard to relate. But if there is no standing or sitting, no time, but it continues, it's just not physical activities, it's also physical emotions. So here this becomes harder. Do this.
Neither sleep nor waking, neither anger nor laughter, neither joy nor sadness, neither silence nor speech. If he would sometime be enraged and at times be happy, he would change. All these things are only true for those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is dust. In contrast, he is elevated and exalted above all this.
Yeah, those are all limited things. So, but this is hard for a traditional Christian, Jew, Muslim, or a believer in general. Okay, no sleeping, no waking. We can mention that, right? Okay, but no anger nor laughter. He's or he's not angry. That's when we sin. He's not pleased when we do the right thing. Why would I even care about doing the right thing? No joy, no sadness. When I suffer, I always felt so comforted when I thought that I'm so sad and God feels my sadness and empathetic with me. He doesn't feel these feelings. Neither silence nor speech? What? No speech? But he spoke. Didn't we say that he spoke and the whole people of Israel heard his voice? That still was the main argument of Yehuda Halevi, that he speaks. And if he doesn't speak, why? Well, we talk about the word of God. Why we talk about even holy books that are God's words. So he says, no, those are human qualities. And so they're only imagery. But what then is the truth, right? Not easy to wrap your head around. Okay, so I would think that he means it's the same as the Torah speaks the language of men. The language of men is speech, but the language of God, the law of God, the will of God is something that cannot be poured into human language, which is unwritten, which is you need a sense. Maybe it's called conscience, maybe it's called intuition, and the prophets knew that. They knew what God wanted in an unspeakable way. They had a sense, and then they poured it into human language. So that means that the holy word of God is divine, but it's also human at the same time. This could overthrow your entire view of religion and God. All right, enough of that. Now I want to go to some practical rabbinic activities. Some of the laws that he describes, simple laws. The laws of getting up in the morning is called morning blessings. They have evolved to in Jewish liturgy for most communities in a different way. What does he say? And remember, I haven't said it yet, so I'm going to say it now. And keep in mind now that Maimonides is taking the laws from the Talmud, not like, there's a difference because later people have done it too, but there is a famous code of law which is called the Shulchan Aruch. You don't have to remember this if you don't know it, but that's also a bit after the Middle Ages, so it's not even part of our curriculum, but which has also uses Maimonides, the Mishneh Torah, as a source, but also others. But you see, if you compare Maimonides to some of the other sources, where written by, or even partially by Ashkenazi scholars, you see that they take Jewish law from the Talmud, like Maimonides did, but add to it locally evolved customs. So a custom that is ingrained in the Jewish community becomes also law. He doesn't do that. He doesn't include any customs that have grown, even customs that are, the vast majority of people do it. Maybe all of them do it. If it's based on Talmudic law, if it's not based on Talmudic law, he leaves it out and sometimes even says, we shouldn't do this. So that's a whole different idea about the role of customs. In generally in Ashkenazi communities, a custom, if it's really widely ingrained in the Jewish community, becomes like, say, a holy Jewish law, basically. So he doesn't do that. So let's start reading. Thank you so much, Cassandra. That was lovely to hear you after so long. And I'm happy you're here, but you're here mostly. I just haven't done justice to you enough by letting you read. I see, is Brittany here?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, she's here. Hi, Brittany.
Yes.
Hi, good to have you. Do you want to start reading?
Sure. Laws of Prayer, Chapter 7. When a person awakes after he is done sleeping, he says, while he still is in bed, my God, the soul that you have placed within me is pure. You created it, you formed it, You breathed it into me, and you preserve it within me. You will ultimately take it from me and restore it to me in the time to come. As long as the soul is lodged within me, I give thanks to you, Lord my God, master of all works. Blessed are you who restores souls to lifeless bodies.
Yeah. Do you have any reflections on this?
Um,
You know what this prayer is in Hebrew?
this is
Eloheinu Shemana Natati Tehora. That's not what most people say in bed, right? They say Modeh Ani Lefanecha.
yeah.
Yeah. So this was originally what you said in bed. Now later I think it's the Tosafists came up with the idea, and maybe it's Parsha Kabbalah. I have to figure out when that started. But definitely in Ashkenazi lens, the idea that if you wake up and you have a level of impurity, then you have to first wash your hands before you say the name of God. So therefore, they said you cannot say this blessing when you just wake up, even before you open your eyes. So therefore, they Modeh Ani Lefanecha was then later. This was postponed to a later point of the day, and then they replaced this with Modeh Ani Lefanecha because it doesn't have the name of God. But Modeh Ani Lefanecha has no place in the Mishneh Torah at all, and it's not from the Talmud. It's a much later source. So originally, according to original halacha, and as Maimonides describes it at least, this is what you say when you're still in bed. Okay, then
When one hears the sound of roosters, one recites, Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who gives the rooster understanding to distinguish between day and night.
so this is also part of what we call the morning blessings, and people say it even if they don't hear a rooster. Maimonides would say no, you can only say when you hear a rooster. Now in those days, most people had chickens, and even if you didn't have them, the neighbors had it. And early in the morning, the roosters all start crowing, and that was basically the alarm clock of the day. But it's amazing. The people are amazed that you don't even see, even with really good eyes, you don't see that the light is already coming. They start crowing right before the light starts coming. So it seems that they are announcing the coming of the day, and it's amazing that they, by the way, crowing for roosters is just like singing for birds. So the birds also start singing at that point of the day when it's still pitch dark, but right before the light starts. But this is later people have said have disconnected this from hearing a rooster crow, and then have said, well, what is sichvi? Sichvi is is the word for rooster, and they say, well, that's really our soul that sees between light and darkness and stuff. But that's according to Maimonides. That's all later, not historic, not original. It's really about when you hear the rooster. What's the next?
When one rubs his eyes, one recites, Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who opens the eyes of the blind.
Yeah. So when you you woke up and your eyes are still closed, and then you think, oh no, I'm gonna sleep anymore, and then you hear the rooster, okay, and think, oh yeah, it's really morning. You start rubbing your eyes. That's when you say that blessing. Then,
When one sits in bed, one recites, Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who unchains those who are bound.
yeah, because this is actually a very beautiful thing, because you can be bound by sickness, you can be bound by slavery, you can be bound, but when you're asleep, you dream that you want to run away, but you're chained to your bed because you don't have control over your body. So like you're in your dream, you're running, but you're really stuck to your bed. So this is a waking up and having control over your body is a metaphor in a way for people who are addicted or enslaved or by all things, that God can enable us to throw away our shackles, basically. So it's kind of a very beautiful prayer. Yeah.
When one lowers his feet from his bed and rests them on the ground, one recites, Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who spreads the earth over the waters.
That's connected to the old idea that the earth was floating on water, but nonetheless, it's basically saying we have foundation under our feet. But you have to just come up with a new interpretation of this prayer. once you know that the earth is not floating on water. But it would say like there is something solid. Thank God we have an earth to walk on, and we have a life to live. Then,
when one gets up, one recites, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who straightens those who are bent."
that's always nice too, that you're not paralyzed or whatever. Uh-huh. And now you wash your hands. You've already said, according to Maimonides, lots of blessings without washing your hands. So this whole idea that your hands are impure and therefore you have to wash your hands before you say any of these prayers, yeah, that is not Talmudic law. That's not Maimonides.
Before one washes his hands, one recites, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us the washing of the hands."
Yeah, but it continues.
Before one washes his face, one recites, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who removes the bonds of sleep from my eyes and slumber from my eyelids." Followed by, "May it be your will, Lord my God and God of my ancestors, that you accustom to me to perform good deeds and not sins or transgressions. May my good inclination have the upper hand over me and not my bad inclination. Strengthen me in your commandments and give me a share in your Torah. Let me find favor, loving kindness, and mercy in your eyes and in the eyes of all those who see me. Bestow upon me gifts of benevolent kindness. Blessed are you, Lord, who bestows gifts of benevolent kindness."
As you, of course, realize that when you wake up and you say all these things and you're washing your face and your hands in your face, you have a prayer book in front of you. So there's a lot of prayers to memorize. If you say this every morning, of course, eventually you'll get it down pat, and it's in Hebrew. Of course, you can say it if you don't know Hebrew in English or in Arabic or whatever language, but it's a lot to memorize. Then you continue.
Before one puts on his clothes, one recites, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who clothes the naked."
Yeah.
Before one puts on a belt, one recites, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who girds Israel with strength."
Yeah, which is nice. Sometimes you feel powerless, right? As an individual, but also as a nation, especially when you don't have your independence, when you're a betrotten minority everywhere. So you want to be, and people, maybe it's anti-Semitism and people spit on you, look down on you. So you have to say, I get the strength to do what I have to do and to continue on the right path. But I believe it's the right path, of course. Um, so there's when you put on the belt, or the zunar, of course. That's probably what it was in Maimonides' time. And zunar was what people had to wear, right? Minorities in Islamic countries. To see that to connect that to a more to an inner strength, and then
Before one covers his head, one recites, "Blessed are you, Lord our King, Lord our God, King of the universe, who crowns Israel with glory."
yeah, so you're proud of who you are.
Before one puts on his shoes, one recites, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has provided me with all my needs."
Yeah, on my knees. Well, why was that shoes? Now, in the olden days, many poor people, one of the poor people sometimes only had one or two pieces of robes to put on. Maybe one for the days daily and another for Shabbat, and very poor. Poverty is, we talk about poverty now, it's nothing to compare to poverty then. I mean, people didn't have even the struggles described in the Talmud, that people don't even have enough money to buy oil for to light a little lamp for Shabbat, or to have to buy wine or grape juice for kiddush. So people are really struggling. And one of the last things that people would buy, especially in warm countries, would be shoes. A lot of poor people. I've been in Africa many times, and there's still people walking just barefoot constantly, especially children. Who buys shoes for children who the size of their feet constantly grows? So if you have shoes, then you really have a reason to thank God that He's giving you. Once you have shoes, you have all you need. That's basically it. That's the top of the cream. Wow, this person has everything so together. He even has shoes. Right? That's basically what it is, and we should be grateful for these things, even though, and that's why studying history is so good, because you realize basically so many things that we take for granted. Then
When one walks out to go his way, one recites, Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who prepares the steps of man.
yeah, okay. But now, shall I? Let me look to who else I can honor with a reading turn. Is Imani here?
Yes.
Imani, thanks for coming and being with us. We'll go to the next slide, Imani.
These blessings have no particular order. Instead, one recites each of them in connection to what it refers to when it occurs. For example, if one fastens his belt while still in bed, that is when he recites who girds Israel with strength.
Yeah, so later based on mysticism called Kabbalah, we're going to talk about that. People have said, oh no, this is very important that you say it in a certain order, because otherwise, I don't know why, but otherwise you mess up something. I don't know. He says, no, there is no particular order. You do it when it happens. If I put on my belt before I get up, I would say first, who girds Israel with strength. That's when I say before I put on my belt. And then I get up from bed. Then I say, who raises the, how is it in English? Hold on here. Then I say then I say who straightens those who are bent, right? So it is just not as the orders of occurrence.
Or if someone hears the sound of the roosters, that is when he recites who gives understanding to the rooster.
Yeah. So if you hear a rooster later, you're already dressed. Oh, you hear the rooster. I didn't hear him before. Okay, then you say the blessing. Yeah.
Any blessing which is not applicable should not be recited. For instance, someone who sleeps with his clothing on upon rising should not recite the blessing, who clothes the naked.
Yeah, you're already wearing your clothing, so you don't say the blessing over putting on your clothing. Or
someone who walks barefoot should not recite the blessing, who has provided me with all my needs.
Right. So those people in Africa that I met who don't have shoes, they should not say that blessing. And hopefully they can say the blessing soon after they buy it. And I have enough money to buy shoes.
The people in most of our cities have the custom to recite these blessings one after another in the synagogue, whether they are applicable or not. This is not a mistake. This is a mistake, and it is not proper to follow this practice. One should not recite a blessing unless it is applicable.
Yeah, it's actually bad to say blessing when there's no application, just willy-nilly out of context is what he says. And this is an example how he doesn't hold customs to be decisive for Jewish law. Because most of our congregations, most of our communities, people just go morning to synagogue to pray, and then they say all these prayers just one after the other, just a list of these prayers, but not connected to the action. He says, this is a mistake, and you should stop doing that. Just if you go to synagogue, do it before you go to synagogue, when you do these actions, and that's basically it. So once again, that's very, very radical thinking and straightforward thinking. Now, besides the Mishneh Torah, we were talking about the Mishneh Torah, where he has, for all the Jewish laws, which is typically, of course, a rabbi is a teacher, so that's his rabbinical teaching skills and teaching whatever traits. Now, Maimonides also wrote letters to offer people advice and guidance. Here is actually an image of his letter. For those who know Hebrew, he writes on top, B'Shem Adonai El Olam, in the name of God, the eternal God. In the name of the Lord, the eternal God. It's a more formal letter than the rest of the letters. But you see the second word, Adonai, for those who know Hebrew, sorry for those who don't, there is 3 yuds with a kamatz underneath it. And which is very interesting because there is now a case, people sometimes write a hey or 2 yuds. There was a custom to do 3 yuds. It looks good. Okay. Okay, so we'll now look at his letter to the Jews of Yemen. The Jews of Yemen had a very specific uh, yeah, need. They were in a specific situation. Can you continue, Maimonides?
After the appearance of a false Messiah, the Jews in Yemen had been forced to convert to Islam by the local ruler. After this ruler was overthrown and replaced by someone else, this ruler allowed the Jews to return to Judaism.
Yeah. Now the question arises.
They worried that perhaps their conversion to Islam had been equivalent to a holy oath. Should they return to Judaism or should they keep that oath and remain Muslims?
So the question is, we had proclaimed Islam. Maybe there was maybe we was an oath to God. Now we're Muslim. Although we are Jewish, does God want us to stay Muslim or go back to Judaism? Okay, actually, before they wrote Maimonides, they first had written to a Ashkenazi rabbi who had actually said that. He had said, this is like an oath, and now you should have rather be killed than convert to Islam. But now since you did, now you have to remain a Muslim. And they were distraught, and they wrote Maimonides, and he says, this is ridiculous. First of all, you should not have been killed in order to prevent conversion to Islam, because you should have that choice. Rather, you should be killed rather than commit idolatry to worship an idol. But Islam is not idolatry because it's the same God and they're monotheists. That's not the problem with Islam. So you can, and of course we saw last week that Maimonides and the whole family had outwardly converted themselves. So he's very empathetic to these people. This is what he writes.
You write that the rebel leader in Yemen forced the Jewish inhabitants of all the places he had subdued to abandon the Jewish religion, just like the Berbers had forced them to do in the West. Truly, this news has broken our backs and has astounded and dumbfounded the whole of our community.
Interesting that he writes, the Berbers had forced them to do in the West. These Berbers were, of course, the Almohads, and the West, and this is a letter is written in Arabic because the Jews in Yemen speak Arabic and he speaks Arabic. The West in Arabic is al-Maghrib, that means the West. But al-Maghrib is also the word for Morocco nowadays. And it also included Spain, because Spain and Morocco are the same region, we're both in the West, the most western part of the known world. So it says the same happened in the West, meaning to us, yeah?
You write that the hearts of some people have turned away, that uncertainty came over them. Their beliefs were weakened while others had not lost faith. And now, my co-religionists, it is essential for you all to give attention to what I am going to point out to you. You should impress it upon the minds of your women and children so that their faith be strengthened. May the Lord deliver us and you from religious doubt.
He's going to encourage them.
Remember that ours is the true and authentic divine religion, revealed to us through Moses, the master of all prophets, both the former and the later, through which God has distinguished us from the rest of mankind.
So he's going to say, well, he's encouraging them by saying, don't start doubting yourself. You have the truth.
This did not happen because of our merits, but rather as an act of divine grace, and on account of our forefathers who knew God and submitted to him. God has made us unique by his laws and precepts, and our preeminence is manifested in his rules and statutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, meaning that because we got the Torah, God is so good to us that he gave us the laws, and therefore we are in this very special position. Mm-hmm.
Therefore, all the nations, instigated by envy and impiety, rose up against us, and all the kings of the earth, motivated by injustice and hatred, persecuted us. They tried to hinder God, but he cannot be hindered.
Yes, so all over history, people have, out of jealousy, have oppressed the Jews, but and tried to stop us and destroy us, but that was not true because it's really God God's plan that we should that we are under His protection.
Ever since the time of Revelation, every despot of slave that has risen to power has made it his goal and his final purpose to destroy our law and to abolish our religion by means of the sword, by violence, or by brute force. This is one of the two classes which attempt to oppose the divine will.
So there's two ways. It's either by force or the second attempt to destroy Judaism is as follows.
The second class consists of the most intelligent and educated among the nations. They're also tried to demolish our law and to abolish it through arguments that they invent and through controversies which they create. They try to make the law powerless and to wipe out every trace of it through their arguments, just as tyrant plans to do it with the sword.
So not that they try to destroy us through violence, but through leading us astray through their thoughts, through their teachings. Yeah.
After that, a new group arose that combined two methods, namely conquest and arguments, into one, because they believed that this would be more effective in wiping out every trace of the Jewish nation and religion.
Yeah, so in his opinion, Christianity and Islam are both the same. They come with arguments and with persuasions and trying to convert through arguments, but at the same time also through conquest. Yeah.
The first one to have adopted this plan was Jesus the Nazarene. He was a Jew because his mother was a Jewess. He persuaded people to believe that he was a prophet sent by God to clarify questions from the Torah, and that he was the Messiah that was predicted by every prophet. He interpreted the Torah and its precepts in a way that would lead to its total annulment, to the abolition of all of its commandments, and to the violation of its prohibitions.
Well, we had a class on the beginning of Christianity, the origin of Christianity, and you know perhaps that I do not believe that Jesus really did this, but it was his followers after him, and the followers of the followers, basically, who presented him this way. But that's besides the point. This is how Christians themselves portray Christianity, so it's okay to say it then, I guess. Yeah.
After him arose the madman who emulated his precursor since he paved the way for him, but he added the additional goal of imposing rule and submission, and he invented his well-known religion. All these men aimed at placing their teachings on the same level with our divine religion, but only a simpleton who lacks knowledge of both would equate divine institutions with these human practices.
Yeah, he calls Muhammad the madman. That's because there are stories even in the Islamic tradition that when Muhammad had a revelation, he got in a fit. It's similar to how do you say epilepsy? Like he was shaking and sweating and then he woke. When he got out of it, he got he told people of a new revelation. So it's often seen as by some people as a demon, or now some people, medical people say this might have been some kind of a condition. In any case, he calls him the madman, al majnun, which is of course not flattering, but yes, that's what he says. Okay.
He's calling the madman Jesus the madman?
Sorry?
He's calling Jesus the madman?
No, Muhammad.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Now, my brothers in the diaspora, it behooves you to encourage one another, the elders to guide the youth, and the leaders to direct the masses. Agree with the truth that is immutable and unchangeable, and to the following beliefs of a religion that shall never fail.
So it says the truth cannot be changed. It's a very philosophical notion, very straightforward. And so that means that if Judaism was the true religion, and then where Christians claim that God had changed this plan and replaced it with Christianity or later with Islam, It's not possible because the truth cannot be changed if this is God's revelation. So hold on to that. This is important. You are on the right path. You have the original revelation. Yeah.
The entire Torah was divinely revealed to Moses, of whom it was said, "With him do I speak mouth to mouth." It will neither be abrogated nor superseded, neither supplemented nor abridged. Never shall it be supplanted by another divine revelation.
Yeah. So we talked about abrogation. Islam claims that it was Judaism, the Torah was abrogated and replaced by the Quran. But he says, no, that will never be done. So this is really helping the Yemenite community to feel proud about their heritage and to stick to it. And actually, the Jews of Yemen have that saved the Jewish community of Yemen. And traditionally, they have followed at least a big chunk of the community of Yemen. Maimonides in every opinion, so not just in theory but in practice. And there's actually even a prayer that they say that they ask God to bless the soul of Maimonides, basically, and thanking God for his teachings. Yeah, we're almost done with this part, and then I'll go to someone else. Thank you so much already in advance, Imani.
You're welcome. Remember, my co-religionists, that this great and incomparable and unique historical event is attested by the best of evidence. For never before or ever since has a whole nation witnessed a revelation from God or beheld his splendor.
This is exactly the main argument in favor of Judaism by Yehuda Halevi, as we saw. This is the last slide of this letter.
Remember, my brothers, that because of our sins, God has placed us in the midst of this people, the Arabs who have
Arabs, yeah.
The Arabs who have persecuted us severely and placed poisonous and discriminatory laws against us. Never did a nation molest, degrade, debase, and hate us as much as they did.
Well, Maimonides has been through a lot under the Almohads, and then now he reads about the Yemenites, and he says he hadn't seen the worst in the future yet, because we have we'll see the Inquisition in Catholic Spain was probably even worse, and then later Hitler, of course, is the worst. But at this point, he believes this is the worst that has ever been in the history of Jewish history. Although, of course, people tend to think that with the time that they live in, there's always the worst that's ever been. If you look back in history, it always looks more innocent than it looks when you're in the middle of it. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you. Thanks again, Nimoni. I'm going to go. Is Gabrielle there? Probably not. Now we'll go. I don't think so, right, Gabrielle? No, Gabrielle says she's not here. We'll go to Sylvia, Mrs. Chekalo, on Islam. What does he say about Islam? This is from a letter that Maimonides wrote in answer to an inquiry from a Rabbi Obadiah. This Obadiah was a convert from Islam. He had converted to Judaism, and yeah, it's a convert from Islam who became Jewish cannot safely live in an Islamic country if he values his life, which he does, obviously. Then he can only convert to Judaism if he moves to a Christian land, and that's where Obadiah lived. Now, the Christians, and the Jews under Christianity, didn't really know Islam, and so in their mind, they thought that Islam was a form of idol worship, just as Christianity worships things besides God, i.e. Jesus, Mary, etc. They also believed that Islam was similar, and they kept saying, second-hand information, of course, but they kept saying, your former religion, they're not really monotheists. But Obadiah said, look, I embraced Judaism, I believe in Judaism, but I cannot believe that Islam, I was a pure monotheist, and all the Muslims are monotheists. That's not why I became Jewish, it's just because of the Torah. And they said, no, because the Kaaba, there's a stone, and they worship, but they don't worship the stone. Yeah, but it's idol worship, and there's some other things that Muslims do. So this Obadiah was struggling, and he said, "Really, really, are other Muslims?" You start doubting yourself if everybody says the same thing. And he said, I wonder, is this really idol worship? I never thought so. So he writes Maimonides, and he says, Maimonides, is this really true? And this is Maimonides' answer.
The Ishmaelites are not idol worshippers at all, and they assign the proper unity to God, a unity which has no imperfection. Even though they lie about us and tell tales and say that we claim that God has a son, we should not lie and say that they are idol worshippers.
Maimonides here says clearly, no, they're not idol worshippers at all. So they believe in God as being one in the proper way. He knew because he lived among the Almohads, right? He knew that they were imperfect monotheists. Okay, and even though they tell lie about us, because they say that they claim that we believe that God has a son. Actually, there is a text in the Quran, and it says Christians say that Jesus is the Son of God, and Jews say that Ezra is the son of God. Now, every time I tell this, no Jew has ever heard of that concept. So nobody believes, no Jew in the whole wide world believes that God has a son, but it's in the Quran. So many Muslim preachers will say these Jews, they claim to be monotheists, but not really monotheists, because how can they believe that God has a son? Nobody in reality. So he says this is a lie. So even though they tell a lie, we should not tell a lie about them and then say that they are idol worshippers, because they are not. Continue, please.
Even if a person says that the house which they glorify is a house of idol worship, and that their fathers worshipped idols in the same house, so what? Those who bow down there today have their hearts directed to heaven. Our sages already said that if a person bows down to a house of idol worship and he thinks that it is a synagogue, indeed his heart is devoted to heaven.
So even if it was once upon a time a house of idol worship, it doesn't really matter. There is no idol worship done now there, and no one who bows down to the Kaaba does that for idol worship.
Such are all these Ishmaelites today, including children and women. Idol worship is wiped out from their mouths. Their errors and foolishness is in other matters, which all is impossible to tell in writing. But in the unity of God, they have no errors at all.
So there's a lot of errors in Islam, he says, and even foolishness, and I cannot tell in writing because I would endanger myself. I do not like to be killed if this comes out. But the unity of God, absolutely, they're totally perfect, right? And we already know that Ishmaelites is another word for Arabs, and then later it became a word for Muslims in general. Yeah.
All in all, even though the origin of certain things is from idol worship, there is no person in the world who throws stones, and no one prostrates to that place, and no one does these things for the sake of idol worship, not with his mouth and not in his heart, but rather directs his heart to heaven.
Yeah, those are he's describing certain rituals during the Hajj, during the pilgrimage, throwing stones, symbolically stoning the devil. It's not about idol worship, he says. Mm-hmm.
As far as there's any blame directed against the Muslims, it is not based on their worship or relation to God, rather on other matters which is impossible to tell in writing. It is not the religious aspect that is wrong, rather the lies that they tell about the Jews, as we see in their claim that Jews ascribe a son to God.
Yeah, so he brings it up again. So that is bad, and maybe their oppression of others and violence, maybe that some Muslims suppose, and many Muslim regimes have shown. That is a problem, but not their belief in God is just pure. So that's nice to know. Now, what does he say about astrology?
On astrology.
Okay, sorry.
I note that you are inclined to believe in astrology and in the influence of conjugations of the planet among human affairs. You should dismiss such notions from your thoughts. Cleanse your mind as one cleanses dirty clothes.
Already mentioned last week very briefly that he didn't believe in astrology, even though a lot of people actually believe this was a science. He says the science is nonsense. Cleanse your mind as one cleanses dirty clothes. This is still to the Ammonite because the Ammonite person had mentioned something. This is this is still in the letter to the Jews of Yemen. Yeah.
I noticed your statement that science is little cultivated and that learning does not flourish in your country, which you attribute to the influence of the
Conjunctions.
conjunctions in the earthly trigon. Remember that this low state of learning and science is not peculiar to your country, but is widely prevalent among the Jewish people today.
A lot of people do not have a high standard of learning in science. It's not just for you. Mm-hmm.
This condition is not due to the earthly or fiery
Fiery. So
trigon.
there were four elements in classical philosophy. You have earth and water and fire and earth and air. And so a trigon is probably a conjunction of planets in the element of fire or earth, etc., etc. He said it's not at all the case.
As is provided by the fact that Solomon, king of Israel, lived during the earthly trigon, yet scriptures testified that he was wiser than all men.
So who knows when Solomon was born, but he actually claims to know that King Solomon, who is known to be the wisest of all men, was born in the earthly trigon, astrologically speaking, and even though, and so that cannot be a proof at all, or an excuse for not having much learning. It's nothing to do with the stars. Now, as a physician, and this is very interesting too, Maimonides is the physician. Yes. Okay. Are you still okay to read? I think so, right?
Yeah. In Fustat, Maimonides had become the court physician. First, he served under the last Fatimid Caliph, under the Saladin, who would take Jerusalem from the Crusaders.
Yeah, so Saladin took over from the Fatimids, and so he became, he wrote an oath for physicians, that a physician should take an oath, or a prayer, yeah?
His oath for physicians. By your eternal providence, you have appointed me to watch over the life and the health of your creatures. May the love of my profession inspire me at all time. May neither greed or reluctance, nor thirst for glory, or for a great reputation engage my mind. For the enemies of truth and charity could easily deceive me and make a forgetful of my lofty aim of doing good to your children.
Yeah, we'll leave it at this, but this is a prayer that a doctor should say, that he's totally to dedicate himself, be grateful for God, and to dedicate himself to for other people, and only see the person and not his own prestige and stuff. Now he was also the Nagid. We know what the Nagid meant. Let's say the political leader of a Jewish community. I mean, in this case of Egypt, and under the Fatimids, Egypt was also under Saladin. Even Jerusalem and the Holy Land was part of that. So he was also the Nagid over these areas.
Maimonides successfully fundraised the ransom to redeem Jews that were held captive by the Crusaders.
Yeah.
Being a court physician had its pros and cons. Pro, close to the throne, so it was easier to advocate for Jewish interests. The con, he was a physician and a rabbi, extremely heavy task.
Yeah, he writes to his friend Samuel Ibn Tibon, who was actually involved in translating the Guide to the Perplexed. He writes,
"My duties to the Sultan are very heavy. I am obligated to visit him every day, early in the morning, and when he or any of his children or concubines are indisposed, I cannot leave Cairo, but must stay during most of the day in that place. It also frequently happens that one or two of the officers fall sick, and I must attend to their healing. Hence, as a rule, every day, early in the morning, I go to Cairo, and even if nothing unusual happens there, I do not return to Fustat until the afternoon. Then I am famished, but I find the
antechambers, meaning the side rooms,
filled with people, both Jews and Gentiles, nobles and common people, judges and policemen, friends and enemies, a mixed multitude who await the time of my return. I dismount from my animal, wash my hands, go forth to my patients, and entreat them to bear with me, while I partake of some light refreshment, the only meal I eat in 24 hours. Then I go to attend my patients and write prescriptions and direct for their ailments. Patients go in and out until nightfall, and sometimes, even as the Torah is my faith, until 2 hours and more into the night. I converse with them and prescribe for them, even while lying down from sheer fatigue. When night falls, I am so exhausted that I can hardly speak.
Yeah, so it's very amazing that he still had time to write all these letters and stuff, but not enough time for sure. He wrote books and treatises on balance of diet. He's very much into balance. Balance your diet, balance your eating, balance your drinking, sex, no indulgences. Balance your emotions. If your emotions are balanced, that will also give you a healthy. If you're very anxious, you might get stomach pains or back pains, etc. Do he also prescribe exercise? I should take that to heart. And fresh air, for instance, he would. Very few doctors would. He would actually send patients to who live in filthy neighborhoods outside of the city to get some fresh air. And then he wrote treatments for some of these ailments. I'm going to skip this. And the last 3 slides, and then that's it. That's very short.
Maimonides died on December 12th, 1204, in Fusta. It is widely believed that he was briefly buried in the study room of the synagogue courtyard, and that soon after, in accordance with his wishes, his remains were exhumed and taken to the land of Israel, where he was supposedly reinterred.
Yeah.
The caravan transporting Rambam's body from Egypt to Israel was robbed. The camel with his body ran off into the desert. Months later, people found the camel wandering around Tiberias with the body on it. It walked up to a certain spot and refused to move. They assumed that the body belonged to Rambam and buried it there. This place became a destination for pilgrims.
And I have here, this is a photo of his grave. Well, of course, look at this story. It's very much the question if it's him who's buried there. They just found the body, and how random if he's on his way to Israel and they're not even there. And then although Tiberias is very deep into Israel, but let's say it's Maimonides. Now they go to his grave to ask him to intercede for them with God, and have a tear on his face because he was very much. He said, "You're not allowed to go to a grave to ask people to do things." So what people honor Maimonides is by actually violating what he was very much believing in it. So it's very, very crazy. It's how do I say? It's ironic. And that was our second class of Maimonides, all very short, and we could all go into certain things much longer, and it's all extremely interesting. But we don't have that luxury and the extra time. I hope this was interesting. So next class is on Thursday. We're going to talk about Maimonides' son, Abraham Maimonides, also called Rabbeinu Abraham. It's going to be extremely interesting, very unusual, and surprising. So stay tuned, I would say. Thank you for your attention.
Ever